The rain had started around midday. At first, a soft, unobtrusive drizzle, like a gentle reminder that autumn had settled in. But as the hours slipped by, it grew more insistent, turning into a steady curtain of heavy drops that splashed against old rooftops and darkened the cracked asphalt streets. The Brooksfield train station, once bustling and full of life, met the rain with its usual indifference. It had seen weather like this countless times over the decades, in the days when dozens of trains passed through daily, and in more recent years, when life here had slowed to just a few departures and arrivals each day. Tonight was one of the quiet nights. A handful of passengers, wrapped in coats, sat scattered across the hall, each lost in their own thoughts. The warm glow of vintage ceiling lamps spilled over the worn benches and wooden floors, marked with damp footprints from wet shoes. Margaret Holden sat by one of the tall windows, watching the blurred, rain-slicked street beyond. She wore a dark green wool coat, old but still well-kept. With a high collar she occasionally turned up against the drafts that slipped in when the door opened. In her hands was a paper cup of coffee, long since gone cold. She hadn't noticed when it lost its warmth. Her thoughts had wandered too far. This trip was unusual for her. In recent years, she rarely left her small hometown. At 63, her life, once filled with work, travel, meetings, and plans, had narrowed to simpler pleasures: tending her garden, reading in the evenings, walking to the park on sunny afternoons. But today she was heading to Fairview, a few towns over, to help her younger sister, Evelyn, recover from a minor surgery. The weather suited her mood. Rain always brought Margaret a strange comfort, though it carried with a quiet, wistful melancholy. She liked the way the world outside blurred into soft shapes and muted colors, how the edges of everything seemed to dissolve into a dream. A soft cough broke through her thoughts. Turning her head, she noticed a figure sitting several benches away, a man in a long dark overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat. He sat still, head slightly bowed. His face was hidden in shadow, but even so, she guessed he was about her age, perhaps a little older. "It seems it's just the two of us tonight," she said, deciding a few words might make the waiting easier. The man lifted his head slightly, and for a moment she caught the faintest curve of a smile. "Almost," he replied in a low, calm voice. "This reminds me of evenings long ago." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. The rain, empty benches, the distant sound of trains. Years ago, stations like this were never this quiet. Soldiers leaving for the front, families saying goodbye, lovers reuniting after months apart. Now, he gestured slightly toward the nearly empty hall. "It feels like there are more ghosts here than passengers." Margaret smiled faintly. "That's an interesting way to put it." They fell into silence for a while, listening to the steady drumming of rain against the roof. There was something in the man's voice that felt grounding, as if he had seen both joy and loss, and had learned how to carry both without letting either overwhelm him. Her train was still 20 minutes away. Plenty of time to hear at least one story. Part 2. A conversation in the quiet. Margaret shifted slightly on the bench, tucking her scarf closer to her neck. The rain's rhythm had softened, turning into a steady whisper outside. The station felt warmer now, not because the temperature had changed, but because the silence between her and the stranger had taken on a certain comfort. "You travel often?" she asked at last, her voice gentle, curious. The man's hat tilted slightly as he shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. "I used to, A lot. All across the country. Mostly by train. There's something about the rails, once they get into your blood, they never leave you. Margaret smiled faintly. I believe that. When I was younger, I used to take the train to the city for college. I'd sit by the window for hours, just watching the fields, towns, and rivers pass by. I remember feeling like every mile was pulling me toward something, like some great adventure was waiting. He nodded slowly, as if he understood every word. And now, she hesitated, as if trying to put something delicate into words. Now my world is smaller. Home, garden, books. Visiting my sister when she needs me. It's not bad, just smaller. Small doesn't mean empty, the man said quietly. Sometimes the smaller the circle, the deeper it runs. His words struck her with surprising force. She had never thought of it that way before. Lately, she felt the years slipping past faster than she liked. Her days filled but fragile, as if she could feel time thinning like worn fabric. And you, she asked, what do you do now? He was silent for a moment. I listen, he finally said. She tilted her head. To what? To people, to the world, to the things most folks rush past without noticing. Something about the way he said it made her think of a still lake at night, calm on the surface, but deep with quiet mysteries beneath. They began trading stories, places they'd been, moments they'd carried with them. He told her about a tiny station in Montana where winter storms could bury the tracks in a single night, about a lonely diner in Nebraska that served the best peach pie west of the Mississippi, and about watching the sun rise over the Rockies from the back of a sleeper car. Margaret found herself leaning into the stories, as though the words themselves could carry her somewhere far beyond the rain-slick windows. The drizzle outside became softer still, until it was almost a mist. The station's old wooden beams creaked faintly in the shifting wind. Somewhere deep in the building, a clock ticked in steady rhythm, marking the slow passage of night that suddenly didn't feel so empty. Margaret had been so wrapped up in his stories that she almost forgot to ask the most natural question. What made you stop traveling? She said at last. The man didn't answer right away. His posture shifted slightly, and the space between them seemed to fill with a quieter kind of silence. Not uncomfortable, but heavy, like the air before a storm. Sometimes, he began slowly, you lose someone and the world changes shape. The places you once loved start to feel hollow without them. The roads, the stations, they stop being adventures. They become reminders. Margaret's fingers tightened around the coffee cup in her hands. She understood more than she wished she did. I know what you mean, she said softly. Her mind drifted to her husband, Paul. Nearly 10 years had passed since he was gone, and yet there were moments, small, unexpected ones, when she still caught herself reaching for his hand, only to feel that ache of remembering. The absence never really faded. It only grew quieter. I'm sorry, she said. The man inclined his head, accepting her words but not clinging to them. Life gives, life takes. But sometimes, if you're paying attention, it gives back in ways you don't expect. There was something in his voice, a trace of hope, even after loss, that kept her from sinking into pity. Instead, she felt a tug of curiosity. Did something get back to you? She asked. He looked past her, toward the dim outline of the ticket counter. A long time ago, 1974, I was stranded at a station in the Midwest, middle of winter, no money for a hotel, just enough change for coffee. I thought it was going to be one of the loneliest nights of my life, but a stranger sat down beside me. We talked until the morning train came. Just words, nothing more. But those words, he paused, letting the memory settle, changed everything. How? They gave me the courage to make a decision I've been running from. Margaret leaned forward. What decision? To go home, he said simply. To face what I've been avoiding for far too long. She felt the weight in those words, as if they had been carried across decades. Outside, the mist had thickened, blurring the lamplight into pale halos. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of an approaching train trembled in the air, still far away, but coming. The station clock read 8:52. Margaret's train would arrive in just a few minutes. The rain had nearly stopped now, replaced by a gentle mist that clung to the windows. The wooden beams above groaned faintly in the damp, and somewhere in the distance, a single drop of water tapped rhythmically into a metal bucket. The station felt timeless, as though it had been here for 100 years and would remain for 100 more, waiting for stories to pass through. The man shifted on the bench, his gloved hands resting loosely on his knees. Then, almost without ceremony, he reached into his long coat and withdrew a small leather-bound notebook. Its cover was worn smooth, the edges softened with age. Without opening it, he placed it gently on the bench beside her. "What's this?" Margaret asked, surprised by the gesture. "A gift," he said, his voice as calm as it had been all evening. "For your next journey, whichever one matters most to you." Margaret looked at the notebook as though it might vanish if she stared too hard. "I can't take this. It's clearly yours." "You can," he said with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "And you should." The air between them seemed to hold more weight now, as though something unspoken hovered just beyond reach. Before she could press him further, the faint hum she had heard earlier grew into a steady, low vibration beneath the floorboards. Her train was approaching. The man rose slowly, tipping his hat in a gesture so old-fashioned it felt like something from another era. "It was good talking with you, Margaret." Her breath caught. "I don't remember telling you my name." He smiled, not in a way that demanded explanation, but as if the answer was already known and needed no words. "Safe travels." From outside came the conductor's call, echoing along the platform. Passengers began to stir, gathering their coats and bags. Margaret turned instinctively toward the platform doors as the headlight of the train glowed faintly through the mist. When she looked back, the bench was empty. Margaret sat at her sister's kitchen table 3 days later, the soft smell of chamomile tea filling the air. The small leather notebook rested between them, its worn cover catching the light from the window. She still hadn't opened it. Somehow, she had been waiting for the right moment, though she couldn't have said why. Evelyn, her younger sister by 8 years, was stirring sugar into her tea when her eyes drifted to the notebook. "Where did you get that?" she asked casually. "At the station," Margaret replied. "A man I met while waiting for the train gave it to me." Evelyn froze mid-stir, the spoon clinking softly against the mug, her gaze fixed on the notebook with a strange intensity. Slowly, she reached for it. The moment her hands touched the leather, something seemed to shift in her expression, a mix of recognition and disbelief. She turned it over carefully, as if afraid it might crumble in her grasp. "This," Evelyn's voice faltered, Margaret, this looks like Dad's. The words hit her like a physical jolt. Dad's. Evelyn nodded, her voice hushed now. I'm sure of it. He used to carry a notebook just like this everywhere. For his sketches, his little notes, remember? Margaret remembered vaguely. Their father had died when she was only 19, and the memories were scattered. Fragments of a laugh, the warm scent of pipe tobacco, the quiet hum of old train songs he would sing under his breath. She reached for the notebook, her fingers trembling slightly. Evelyn opened the cover. Inside, in familiar, neat handwriting, was a name. Thomas Holden, 1948. The breath caught in Margaret's throat. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier, as if time itself had slowed. She turned the pages slowly, seeing sketches of old train stations, tiny portraits of passengers, and short, thoughtful observations about people and places. One page stopped her cold. In the center, written in bold, deliberate strokes, were the words, "Sometimes you meet a stranger, and they remind you of who you are." Margaret's eyes stung. Her mind spun back to the man at the station, his calm voice, his strange familiarity, the way he'd known her name without asking. She thought of the stories he'd told, the wisdom in his tone, the way he'd seemed to understand her in a way few people did. It couldn't have been him, and yet some part of her believed it had been. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the kitchen window. Margaret closed the notebook and held it against her chest, a smile breaking through her tears. Some journeys, she thought, didn't require trains at all.